Good afternoon, everyone. It's an interesting time to be reaching you in your home. I'm connecting via my home as well, where I'm sitting at my kitchen table. And while I've given lots of talks on well-being all around the world, I have never given a talk that's like the talk I'm giving today, Well-Being in a COVID-19 World. We are currently experiencing an unprecedented situation that changes daily. And one of my staff said to me at the end of last week, people are really getting tired of the word unprecedented. And it's true, but there's hardly any other word to describe the phenomena that's happening at this time. When you think about it, practically every single person around the globe has had their world turned upside down in many ways. And so I'm wondering, do you find yourself getting caught up in worries about the future and creating stories about things that may or may not happen? So COVID-19, this virus that is having such a global impact, was not even on our radar screen. It certainly wasn't in our vocabulary or even consciousness until recently. And it is a novel virus, which means it's new, it has never been seen before. And that's what is making this particular virus so dangerous and so unpredictable. So truly, as much overused as that word might be, unprecedented, in so many ways, the world as we know it has changed. What's really unusual about this crisis is that it's a crisis that not only impacts our health and our well-being, but it impacts almost every aspect of the world that we live in, from our economic structures to our infrastructures. And what's particularly, I think, noteworthy is that the stakes are so high, and there's a tremendous amount of fear and uncertainty, which in so many ways makes the new normal feeling a bit off balance. And that's why I think it's so important that we have conversations about well-being, recognizing that well-being may very well be our key to survival. So I want to start out by saying this is really a situation that we are so in this together. And I think more and more of us are realizing that the questions that we need to be asking are not only what can I do during these times, but what can we do during these times to get through this pandemic? And so today I'm going to talk about well-being, and many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the center's well-being model. We talk about the fact that there are many determinants of well-being, including health and purpose, relationships, community, safety and security, and the environment. And I'm going to talk about these same dimensions of well-being, but you'll notice as I talk about them, I'm having a bit of a different focus, focusing very much on the near term, what is right in front of us. So when I talk about health, I always say that, our health is so determined by lifestyle choices and behaviors, what we eat, how much we move, how we sleep, our thoughts and emotions, and our stress. It's actually estimated that 70 to 80% of how healthy people are has nothing to do with hospitals, doctors, health professionals, drugs. It has to do with those lifestyle choices that we make. In these times, as I peel down on each one of these dimensions, I'm going to really talk about what's a priority right now. So certainly healthy eating is a priority. And one of the most important things, I think, is to be planning ahead and minimizing our trips to the grocery store, or consider ordering our groceries or food online, or to take advantage of stores that offer pickup. When we think about healthy eating, It's still important to think about nutrition and building into our diet whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and protein. This is a great time to be thinking about a plant forward diet. So when you look at all of the evidence and research on nutrition and health, there's always a lot of debate about vegan, vegetarian, the keto diet. So there's lots of different choices that people make. But I think, and while there's controversy and there's sort of different research that sort of point to different advantages of different dietary approaches, one thing that everybody agrees on is a plant-forward diet is a healthy diet, which means adding more fruits and vegetables to your diet. Clearly, as you're thinking about healthy eating, keep in mind the whole notion of food preparation. And as I thought about this over the weekend, I thought in some respects, during some days of the week, people might have more time to be focusing on, preparing meals. And so actually cooking meals, preparing meals might take on even heightened significance because people have time to do it. But realistically, during the week, when I know many of you are, trying to work from home, maybe there's even multiple people in the home that are working from home. Some of you might have kids at home and you're trying to monitor their school progress. When you think about your meals during the day, really important to think, what do you have time to do and what do you have energy to do? So keeping that in mind, as well as food or family preferences, also very important. There's a lot online about pantry basics. And as you're thinking about, what to have, in your home, over the next weeks, or months, some quick tips. Certainly, frozen vegetables and fruits are good. Having a variety of grains. You'll see I listed instant oatmeal, quick cooking pasta, rice, couscous. Beans and legumes, either canned or dried beans, nuts and seeds, bagged, canned, or nut butters like peanut butter, soups, broths, sauces, things that have a long shelf life, milk, eggs, cheese, protein that can be either frozen or canned, and great to have a variety of flavorings that are at your disposal. I think in terms of eating healthy, there's a lot of healthy meals that can be made right from the ingredients in your pantry. And it is a great time to try out new recipes. And I have to say, I've really been impressed at how many apps and newspapers are actually really, making freely available to people. They're opening their recipe boxes and really looking at practical tips for people to be able to make things that that they can do right from their pantry. And it's also a great time to join friends for a meal over video chat. So if you haven't done that and made a date with other people, it's a good time to try that and try out one of the web services to do that. And I'm going to ask you to think about what healthy eating tips do you have? And so I love the way we can use this chat function. And so if you have some healthy eating tips, please add them to that chat as we go. So also important in terms of health is to keep moving. We know that exercise helps improve our physical, our mental, and our social well-being. It helps us sleep better, avoid injury, maintain a healthy weight, and it also decreases our risk of disease. And so I know a lot of people are feeling, keep moving. How do we do it? There's no gym. People are missing their yoga, Pilates classes. Their running routine might be off. And so my encouragement to you is try something new. Try a new exercise routine, a balance ball. You can use a TRX at home. Eccentrics is a great toning and movement exercise. You can certainly do weights. And again, just like recipes, there are great video streaming opportunities available. And so a friend last week talked about the fact that she was going to take a dance class from somebody that was teaching out of New York. And so it's a great time to try something new. So which exercise is best, the one that you'll do is the one that's best. And so find something that's easy for you to access that you, in fact, will be committed to doing. Some other things important in terms of movement. I've seen a lot of people improvise to create standing desks, whether it's in islands or in other kinds of forms. Take breaks and be sure to get outside as well. In terms of sleep, some important tips about sleep. We know that sleep is essential for the health of both body and mind. Many of us struggle to get a solid 8 hours of sleep per night. And we know that our sleep can be negatively impacted by a variety of things. Certainly, stress can impact our sleep. So can highly caffeinated coffee and energy drinks. That can impact both the quality as well as the length of our sleep. So some sleep tips. Number one, honor your body's need for sleep. And so, if you have been working all day and if you've been managing kids' schedules all day, maybe go to sleep when the kids go to sleep, if that's even possible. So recognize your body might need more sleep. If you haven't had a sleep routine, this is a great time to really establish a sleep routine. And a sleep routine might be things like, in addition to stop drinking caffeinated beverages, cutting out your screen time for the hour before you go to bed at night. There's other things that you can do in terms of shifting and changing the light in the space that's around you. Certainly stay active during the day. That helps us sleep better at night. Avoid stimulants late in the day, as I mentioned, and to do all that you can to nurture relationships with loved ones. And while that really helps us in so many ways, and I'll be talking more about that under relationships, when we feel that sense of connection and when we're feeling less stressed, that actually really promotes healthy sleep as well. So another area that really impacts our health, all aspects of health, physical, social, emotional, mental health, are our thoughts and emotions. And certainly a huge issue at this time is managing fear and anxiety. Fear is often closely linked with anxiety, and fear and anxiety can impact not only our mental and physical health, it can impact our sleep, it can impact our relationships. An important way to address fear is to, first of all, acknowledge that fear is an emotion that you're feeling and notice how fear is impacting you. And so some strategies, one of the easiest and simplest strategies to do is to take a few deep breaths, making the exhale slightly longer than the inhale. And an example of this is the 4-7-8 breath. And with the 4-7-8 breath, you breathe into the count of 4, you hold for the count of 7, and then you slowly exhale to the count of 8. And you do this breath 3 times, and it literally begins to change your physiology. Interesting story on CNN today of a physician who was feeling really, really anxious. It's very hard to be a frontline healthcare provider at this time. And she was writing in this sort of CNN story about how she found herself feeling so fearful and so anxious. And it occurred to her, maybe I should do what I'm always telling my patients to do. And she described this form of deep breathing, the 4-7-8 breath. Another thing that you can do is to consciously shift your thoughts to something that gives you clarity and something that gives you safety. So in many respects, when we are conscious about it, we can control what we are focusing on in terms of our thoughts, and that can help us manage our fear and anxiety. Few other things that are important. It's very important to stay informed through reputable and news sources, but don't indulge in the 24/7 news cycle. So maybe make a conscious decision that you're going to check in with the news, periodically, maybe a couple of times during the day, but not have it constantly the news feed that's bombarding you during all of your waking hours. But I also want to emphasize that if your fears and anxieties begin to feel unmanageable, I really encourage you to connect with a mental health professional. And we're going to be sharing with you at the end resources that you can tap into. And one thing that I'm very aware of is that a lot of mental health centers, a lot of mental health professionals are making themselves available in online, phone, other kinds of formats. And so I think it's important to recognize that. Explore strategies to reduce stress. And if we were sitting in a room together and we were talking about stress, and I asked you where you are experiencing stress or how do you experience stress in your body, I'm sure people would describe all different things. For some people, they feel it in their head or their shoulders or their gut or their back. And then if we began to explore what strategies are helpful to you in terms of reducing stress, we'd hear a whole variety of things from meditation, Tai Chi and Qigong, to yoga, breathing techniques, guided imagery, exercise, being with other people, being in nature, running. So there's a long list of things that can help us reduce our stress. Very commonly, people will talk about an important stress reduction approach being mindfulness. So I'm going to say just a little bit more about mindfulness as a strategy to manage our stress. Mindfulness means literally being in the present moment. And I invite you to think right now, where are you? So you are perhaps in your home. You're perhaps watching your computer and listening to this webinar. But where is your mind? We spend a lot of our time anywhere other than the present moment, thinking about what happened this morning, thinking about what might happen this afternoon or tomorrow, or sometimes even catastrophizing, sort of the context, that we're in. And so mindfulness is paying attention to our present moment and engaging with our present reality with openness, curiosity, kindness, and a willingness to be with whatever is, with what is. A lot of interest in mindfulness right now. And so whether it's in the popular press, so this is a cover from a Time magazine, The Mindful Revolution, The Science of Finding Focus in a Stressed Out Multitasking World, to the health professional world. And this is an article that appeared in JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, exploring the promise of mindfulness as medicine. And the subtitle says, "A new frontier in the treatment for mental illness and other chronic conditions may not come from pharmaceutical companies, but from within as mindfulness practices gain traction." So mindfulness is a strategy to cultivate our capacity to be fully present. And while there are techniques that you can learn to help you be mindful, sitting meditation, walking meditation, a lying meditation, breath practices, as well as learning techniques, it's a way of being. And so on the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing website, and our Taking Charge of Your Health and Wellbeing website, we have lots of information about ways to learn mindfulness. And we even have some mindfulness meditations that you can tap into. And we have a mindfulness newsletter that we send out. But I'm going to just share with you a very simple, informal mindfulness practice. And it's called the STOP practice. And in this practice, when you have the feeling of being anxious or stressed, to slow down, take a breath, observe the current situation with openness, with compassion, and then choose how you're going to proceed with your options, your choices, with your possibilities. So I might come back to this a little bit later in the webinar in terms of an application for when using a practice like this might be helpful. So that's the whole dimension of health. So what we eat, how much we move, sleep, manage our thoughts and emotions, huge impact on our health. The second dimension I want to talk about is the whole dimension of purpose. And purpose is our reason for getting up in the morning. It's our aim, our direction, very different from our job or career. And when I often talk about purpose, I'm talking about really understanding what are our gifts, what are our values, what are those things that we're passionate about. And I also talk about the research showing that having purpose in life is very connected to our health and well-being. And this particular study was a study funded by the National Institute of Aging of over 6,000 people. And what they found was that people who had a greater sense of purpose and a direction in life were more likely to outlive their peers. In fact, people that had a sense of purpose had a 15% lower risk of death compared to those who said that they were aimless. But what about today? And so I title a slide, Rethinking Purpose in These COVID-19 Times. Really encourage you to think about what's most important now. And this is one of those moments that if you even want to kind of be putting some things on the chat line, you can certainly do that. What's holding meaning for you now? And in what ways are you beginning to rethink your priorities? And it's really interesting, I think, as you rethink even what's possible and you rethink your priorities. I think it's interesting to think of what can we embrace that we have. So this is such a time, I think, of thinking about all the things we can't do. So now we are under the governor's order to shelter in place here in Minnesota. So there's a strange sort of lack of our ability to even kind of do things that normally we do in our lives. And so while we can think about all the things we can't do, I'm encouraging you today to embrace what we can do. Getting outdoors hasn't been canceled. Music and family haven't been canceled. Reading, singing, and laughing haven't been canceled. And doing what you can to cultivate a sense of hope has also not been canceled. So lots of things as we rethink priorities we can focus on. Richard Leiter, who's a senior fellow with the Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing, and he's somebody who has written many books on purpose and has certainly informed our thinking at the center. There was a great interview with Richard that was written up in the Star Trib newspaper over the weekend. And the questions posed to Richard were really, is this a time when people can have the luxury of focusing on purpose? And he explained absolutely and why that was. And he encouraged people to think about, if it's hard to even sort of think about, what ultimately is my purpose, think of this universal default. What if every day you got up and you thought about, what can I do today to grow? And what can I do to give? And what a powerful default purpose for all of us to have. So Richard will be doing one of these webinars for us, over the next few weeks. And so that's something that you can look forward to. So what positive changes in priorities have you noticed in your life? So if you're participating in the chat, and it looks like many people are, and you want to share about what you've done in your own life in terms of shifting in priorities, please feel free to add that. So health, purpose, I've talked about. The next area I want to talk about are relationships. So as human beings, close connections between other people formed by emotional bonds and interactions, we have just an innate need for that as human beings. And what we know is that the health risks of being alone are comparable in magnitude to the risks associated with cigarette smoking, high blood pressure, and obesity. We know in the United States that there's a lot of depression, but there's actually even more loneliness than there is than depression. So important for us during these times to find ways to reach out to other people. Anxiety and isolation increases our vulnerability to disease by triggering high blood pressure, and stress hormones, inflammation among people who otherwise might not get sick. So I encourage you to be thinking about well-being in your own life and those around you. And ask yourself, are there people around you that you feel close to in terms of family and friends? And are there people that you can turn to when you have matters of the that you want to share, good news or bad news or challenging news, or just things that you want to talk to people about in terms of what you're feeling? And are your personal relationships balanced in terms of giving and receiving? So it's very hard for those of us who are caregivers. Sometimes we give until what? We become depleted. So really important to think about, how do we also open ourselves up to be receiving support, recognizing how important that is. So this is a strange time. We talk about social distancing all the time. And actually, I think the term should be that we need to physically distant, but we need to remain emotionally close. And so some things that you can do are to share your feelings. So be open, be authentic, be real, listen deeply, check assumptions and broaden perspectives, build trust, and allow yourself to be vulnerable. And none of us have all the right answers now. None of us have ever done this before. So we're all learning, and find ways to manage conflict. And there is going to be invariably a lot of conflict at this time. People are confined in small spaces, sometimes even with extended family, in ways that are not usual. And people are trying to do things in their homes, teach school and do their jobs. And I mean, it's invariably that conflicts are going to arise. And that's actually even where that whole stop practice that I had mentioned earlier can help you in really kind of focusing on becoming mindful. When we become more mindful, we notice how we are feeling and reacting, and that gives us a choice. Instead of just being reactive, we can actually choose what our response might be. So if somebody is doing something in the house that is troubling you, or that annoying you, or making you angry, or triggering something, instead of being reactive, if you can notice how you're feeling, that's that pause, then you can choose maybe a more helpful, positive response than what you would feel innately inclined to do. So, I'm curious, what are the things that you're doing to stay connected with your family and friends? And again, because there's so many people on the webinar today, if you just even briefly can start writing down some of the things that are going on, it'll be helpful to share that with each other. So I've talked about health and purpose and relationships. Community is critical to our well-being. It's vital to our individual well-being as well as collective well-being. And talk about a time that we need to shift our focus from me to we. It's critical that we adhere to these new norms and restrictions. And in so many respects, our health and well-being is dependent not only on what we do, but on what other people do. I think it's been emphasized so much that young people who may not be as vulnerable to the coronavirus, COVID-19, they may become the perfect carriers and vectors. So while they may not even experience the disease, they may transmit it to somebody else, who will transmit it to somebody else, who will get critically ill or even die. And so it's so important that we recognize that we individually and we collectively have a responsibility. And it's so important to stay connected. Safety and security is going to be critical to our well-being. And I'm sure you've all seen these tips many times, the importance of washing hands frequently with soap and water, or alcohol hand rubs, and to wash for 20 seconds, to not touch your eyes, nose, and mouth, to cover your nose and mouth when you sneeze and cough with your elbow, or a tissue, to avoid crowds and shelter in place, stay at home, if you are ill. I think it's really important to recognize that this is a time of incredible vulnerability. So people are experiencing all kinds of things. There may be households that have one income, and that income has somebody's furloughed or they've lost their job. Even in families that have two incomes, it may be that both people have lost their employment. The rate of people filing unemployment is at a record high, which leads to both food and housing insecurity. When there's that much stress in our environment, that really increases the risk for violence as well as for abuse, which also increases the need for mental health services. So again, we will be sending you out after this webinar today a list of resources that you can tap into. We feel like it's so critical that you have that information and share that information with others. In terms of safety and security, what are some things that you can do? Well, certainly identify factors that compromise safety and security, and identify ways that you can create a personal sense of control and mastery. Figure out what you can control and what you can't control. And so there's so many things that you can control. You can control to some extent your immediate environment, what you eat and how much you move and your sleep. You can control whether you're going to go for a walk or be in nature. You can control whether you're going to limit social media or turn off the news or find fun things to do at home. You can control maintaining your own social distancing. You can control, kindness and grace. Lots that you can't control. None of us can control how long this is going to last, how other people react, if other people are following the rules of social distancing, whether you're going to find toilet paper in the store. So in terms of sort of, again, maintaining balance and well-being, focusing on safety and security, focus on ways that you can create a personal sense of control. Face your fears and anxieties so they don't become debilitating. Practice stress reduction technique and tap into resources. When talking about the environment, I usually talk about things such as the importance of clean air, clean water, talk about climate change, talk about evidence-based design, and being in nature. Today, I'm going to really focus on just some tips for working from your home. So really important to follow some normalcy in routine. And when I say that, I have to kind of laugh because I've been reading lots of tips to effectively work from home. And often it'll say, follow normal morning routines, take a shower and eat breakfast, get dressed in normal work attire, pretend that you're going to the office. Creating some normalcy like that is important. But gosh, sometimes that's really hard when you actually are also sort of working with, multiple people's other people's schedules. Take breaks. That is critical. I've noticed that myself, that I can get on the computer at 7 in the morning, and if I'm not careful, I can almost take no break during the day and still be on the computer at 5, 6 at night. There's a suggestion to create an official workspace or office, and if that's possible, that's great. But I know for many people, there are a lot of people that are working from home, it's pretty hard to do that. Negotiate house rules and norms. I think that is really, really critical. And maybe that even means that different people work at different times a day while other people are, whether it's managing kids or managing meals or, sort of the other kinds of things to kind of keep a household running. But I think it's really important to negotiate those kinds of things. And then do get outside. So much evidence that nature heals, that as Americans, we spend about 90% of our time indoors. most of that time in buildings. We have a huge number of hours we spend a day in media consumption. So this is a staggering amount of time with media consumption. And we know there's a lot of benefits of being in nature. It reduces our stress, improves our sleep, decreases anxiety and depression, leads to greater happiness and life satisfaction, and also reduces aggression. So a source that we have that it might be helpful to many of you is our website, Taking Charge of Your Health and Wellbeing, where we have a lot more information on things that you can do to kind of bring well-being into your own life, and as well as the lives of people around you, as well as explore healing practices. And I want to end my time before getting to the Q&A with just talking about some other practices that I think are really important. One is the practice of cultivating gratitude. Research shows that it isn't happy people that are more grateful, it's grateful people that are happier. And we know that gratitude is linked to lower stress and improved social connections. And there's a lot of ways that people can cultivate gratitude in their life. And sometimes there are formal practices like keeping a gratitude journal. At the Center for Spirituality and Healing, we love this practice called 3 Good Things. And so I'm going to describe it to you. Once a day, it could be in the morning or before you go to bed at night. Write down 3 things that you're grateful for. And once a week, go back and look over that list and notice what's showing up in your life. And so there's evidence that if we start paying attention to this, we'll actually find more things in our life that we're grateful for. And like any other behavior change, if we do this for 21 days, it's easier for this to become a habit. So that's one example of a practice. I also encourage you to think of things that are going to nurture hope for you, and so really think about what are, during these surreal times, what are the things that are giving you hope? And I can tell you, I've thought about this question a lot, and I'll tell you what is giving me hope is the amazing stories I see of people reaching out to other people. And whether it's, neighbors, or whether it's people that are struggling at this time and don't have things, whether it's the musicians that are on Facebook, and whether it's professional musicians or amateur musicians or kids playing music and kind of, again, just finding ways to reach out. Here in Minnesota, Second Harvest Food Bank has collaborating with restaurant chefs in restaurants, and they've created a new entity called Minnesota Central Kitchen, where the restaurants, the chefs are teaming with Second Harvest Heartland to feed the hungry and providing meals. And there are 30 locations of this around Minnesota. So I think there's so many signs of hope around us. And so we're all different. And so it's going to be different things that give us hope. But I think a common thread is often altruism, looking outside ourselves, and making human to human kinds of connections. And also use this as a time to celebrate resilience. When this is all behind us, as it will be someday, we want to be able to look back and say, this was a time that we might have bent, but didn't break, and we had a capacity to bounce back. So lots of the practices that I've talked about today are practices that help us develop resilience. And I want to end by just sharing some wisdom from Bill Gates. And I'm sure you can find this on the internet. He wrote an essay, "What is the COVID-19 virus really teaching us?" And he has 14 points, and I'm only going to highlight a couple of them. But I think this is such an amazing essay, and maybe this is something Molly can send out as well. It's what the COVID-19 is reminding us of. It's reminding us that our true work is not our job. That's what we do, not what we were created to do. Our true work is to look after each other, to protect each other, and to be of benefit to one another. It's reminding us that the power of free will is in our hands. We can choose to cooperate and help each other, to share, to give, to help and support each other, or we can choose to be selfish, to hoard, to look after only ourselves. Indeed, it is difficulties like this that bring out our true colors. It's reminding us that we can be patient or we can panic. We can either understand that this type of situation has happened many times before in history and will pass, or we can panic and see it as the end of the world and consequently cause ourselves more harm than good. And one of the last ones is it's reminding us that after every difficulty, there's always ease. Life is cyclical, and this is just a phase in this great cycle. We do not need to panic, for this too will pass. And so with that, I just want to remind you all that we will get through this, but it will take all of us to do it, to get through this together. So Molly, I'm going to open it up and see if there are a few questions that have emerged that you'd like me to address.
Yeah, Mary Jo, thank you so much. One of the sort of common themes that has come up is that people are feeling really overwhelmed, and they know that, investing in their well-being is super important, but aren't really sure where a good starting point is.
Well, I would say, Molly, take a look at the well-being model. And so those 6 areas that I talked about today, and think about what is easiest to do for you and what is within your control to do. And so, I think that we have to really sort of help people sort of, think through what are some easy steps that you can do that are things that you can control. So, if you're in a situation that are not even in control of what's being, fed to you, you can choose how much you eat. Can you choose, how much you, engage in movement and exercise? Can you choose, how you connect with other people in the world? So really, really focus on what you have control over. That's the place where I would recommend starting.
Great. And we're getting pretty close to the end of the webinar, but maybe I'll just ask one more question. Another thing that's come up is sort of dealing with strong emotions, whether that be anxiety, grief, or anger. And do you have any kind of tips for navigating that during this time?
Well, Molly, I'm going to just focus on grief. And I think this might be a topic that we'll just want to do a whole nother webinar on. This is a time when people are feeling a lot of grief, both individual grief and collective grief. And grief sometimes around small inconveniences, as well as grief over large things, literally loss of livelihood or even loss of life. And what we know about grief is that it's so important, like fear, anger, and anxiety, to recognize the feeling and to begin to acknowledge it. And recognize that grief isn't an emotion that has a beginning, middle, and end, that is on a timeline, that grief comes in waves, that we all grieve individually. And so what might work for one person may not work for another person. And that it's really important for us to sort of find ways to manage our grief. And so lots of the things I've talked about today are things that people might find helpful in terms of grief. But the last thing I would say, Molly, is that it's so important to recognize that the only way to manage grief is to actually go through it. It's not one of those emotions that we can sort of skirt around the edges and not deal with or just suppress. That might delay very much our ability, to get to the other side. But I think that's a topic that's worthy probably of another webinar. So thank you very much for being with us today, and I'll turn it to you, Molly, for closing comments.